This is a story of drama deferred, catharsis denied. To compensate, there are the mountains. I'm ahead of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and in today's book review I am discussing the Italian existential classic by Dino Buzzati, The Tartar Steppe, first written in 1938. Young Giovanni Drogo arrives at the bleak border area of the Tartar Steppe, where he is to take a short assignment at Fort Bastini, an encampment manned by veteran soldiers who have grown old without seeing a trace of the enemy. As his length of service stretches from months into years, he continues to wait patiently for the enemy to advance across the desert, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that he is perfectly free to leave. He waits on for one great and glorious battle. This is going to be a quite chill review. I just wanted to give my quick thoughts on the book because I haven't actually reviewed an existential novel in some time, and I apologise for that. I've been very busy with my other forms of content, my discussions and things like that, organising things and other side projects. So I read Dino Buzzati's book yesterday, all in one sitting, actually. It's not a very long piece. It's about 250 pages, and as you can see, my copy is large text. So in comparison to... Oh yeah, and that's another reason why I haven't done a book review in like 2 weeks. It's basically because I've been reading The Count of Monte Cristo. And I'll show you actually how big the book is. This is how big The Count of Monte Cristo is. So you can already guess why I haven't been reviewing any books as of late. In comparison to my usual schedule, it's really because a mixture of the length of that book that I'm in the middle of reading. I'm reading things around my discussions and things like that. So yeah, anyway, kind of a sidetrack, but I do apologise for not as many book reviews at the moment. I will have some coming out very soon, and hopefully as well as the Monte Cristo piece, because at the moment I'm loving that book. It is really, really good. But anyway, let's get back to the Tartar Steppe. Now, as you would have heard in the beginning of the video, the premise is relatively simple, and the writing is simple as well. Now, that isn't exactly a criticism, but it does make it sort of a light read. Now, that isn't to say, however, that the book in its subject matter is light. It really isn't. This is one of those books which might be easy to read, might be quite fluent in how you might get through it, perhaps, but actually the content is far deeper than the language of which it is conveyed. The central themes of this piece are basically about a man waiting for something to happen, having hope, and arguably false hope, about life getting more meaningful, or in anticipation of something happening. The character and characters in the piece, the soldiers as well as the main character, they are all kind of in this one conspiracy, which I say conspiracy, that's quite a strong word, in this disillusionment that something will happen soon. And so they continue to serve their years in this regiment in the mountains, the Tartar Steppe. Nothing really happens over a span of years for this character. And by the way, if you haven't read the piece, then I guess I will go metaphorical spoilers, but not necessarily narrative spoilers. But if you haven't read the book, then maybe it's best to click away. I don't know, but it's not exactly a surprise what happens anyway, from the premise. The premise itself is quite telling. It's a very symbolic piece because he enters this castle and he talks to this kind of, I think he's a lieutenant at that point. I might be wrong. And he kind of, the character Drogo kind of greets him with an ecstatic hello and, with all the hope in the world, right? And then the soldier is just like, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me like that, with that level of excitement, with that level of humanity, let's say? As I said, this is going to be quite a chill review, so I'm going to go from different points. But at the very end, I liked how he his position at the beginning met its full circle. He was actually the higher regiment soldier who was like, why is the guy talking to me on this mountain path? It was kind of like Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. It was as if he observed somebody in his exact position, which he arguably did, go into the disillusionment that he now was aware of what it really was, but by that point it was too late. He was already, in his 50s. And so all of his life was spent in this fort trying to protect the integrity of a building, of a place which never was compromised to begin with. And what's interesting is, by the end, of course, for those of you who have read the piece, he essentially does meet war, or at least this battle, and he's very numbed towards it. He is very indifferent towards it, because it's almost as if, he's been disappointed for so long that when the moment really comes, it isn't what it seems, or it isn't what he thought it would be as such. And that's only because his mentality throughout the years have changed, but also on a deeper level, when we are in excitement of something, when we have these anticipations, most often than not, the anticipation is far more profound than the actual event itself. Now, that is quite a pessimistic view of things, but in many cases, that is what seems to happen, because the imagination is far more rich and it flourishes far more exciting ideas than what reality often unfolds. And so there's no surprise in that regard that we do end up being disappointed when the grand moment comes. And that's exactly what happens to Drogo in the piece. He experiences this grand deferment of his emotional conclusion, I suppose. And that's the thing, it does come, right? What he wanted did eventually come. But by that point, he was a skeleton of a man. He was a non-human as such, because of this anticipation never meeting its end, apart from the very end, where at that point it didn't matter because he'd been waiting so long. And so this piece, as I said, is about waiting. It's about false hope. It's about also death as well. But he also looks back upon his childhood of it being this innocent time where, opportunities were granted and you could fly in the air as such, whereas later on you can't, because there are responsibilities, there are things that you must hold yourself to, and because you're your own responsibility as an adult, you are left to your own devices. Whereas if you're a child and you do something that is even immoral or off the scale to what the social norm or the laws, you're kind of given a pat on the back and you're like, here's a warning, but be careful. Whereas when you're older, it's pretty much, you suffer for the thing that you commit, right? And so the character loses his innocence by waiting and by, for so long, being infatuated with this idea of hope, which the other soldiers conform to, and he ends up conforming to as well, of course. I used the word numbing or numb earlier, and that's kind of what the piece does. It is a very numbing piece. Now, I even read it outside, by a lovely fountain and great surroundings. And yeah, it really is. It is a piece of literature that stays with you. Although at points I was like, the writing felt a bit off at times. I didn't feel like the author was or is a great writer per se. It's not exactly a lyrical piece, and I perhaps prefer that. It was a moderately written book. It wasn't anything special in its style. It was kind of to the point, which I can fully enjoy that in certain moments, and I did, and I feel like it perhaps adds to the piece, but I don't think the author was necessarily doing that because it adds to the piece. I just think that's his writing style, and he just had a great premise. This book has got really high ratings, and I would probably give it a 4 stars out of 5, because whilst the premise is a 5 stars, and whilst the kind of journey is a 5 stars, I don't really feel like the writing was that great. It was just quite simplistic. That isn't to say the whole book is bad, it's just to say that the writing could have been a bit more interesting. The argument could be made, as I said, where it was done on purpose, but I just didn't get that feeling. I didn't get that feeling. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's done an interview, maybe he wrote about his style, and I haven't seen it, but I did feel like the writing could have been a bit more lyrical, it could have been a bit more interesting. I mean, this is his masterpiece. From what I've seen, he hasn't really written much else apart from this book that's become so critically praised. I do think this is a good book. I do want to read one passage, which I really enjoyed. I mean, there were quite a few passages that were pretty good. Little by little, his hopes grew fainter. It is difficult to believe in a thing when one is alone and there is no one to speak to. It was at this period that Drogo realised how far apart men are, whatever their affection for each other, that if you suffer, the pain is yours and yours alone. No one else can take upon himself the least part of it. That if you suffer, it does not mean that others feel pain even though their love is great, hence the loneliness of life. Here I feel that Dino is kind of reflecting, or not Dino, Drogo. He is reflecting on the idea that, and this is where death comes into it as well, that everybody at the end of the line dies alone, that you know, we all experience that slipping into the abyss, into the ether. Everybody has to do that individually, right? I mean, you know, our hands can be held, we can be consoled, but at the end of the day, it is an experience that everybody has to go through themselves. And I think that, you know, the book in of itself is a reflection of that. It is a reflection of man's innate loneliness, and his innate hopes that are, again, individual to himself. And this could be linked back to the nature of consciousness itself. It is it is by definition an individualistic experience that, you know, we try our hardest to deny that it is of this nature. We love having friends. We love sharing things. I'm sharing my thoughts with you right now. We all love this idea that, you know, we're all in this together. We're all not alone. But actually, the book refutes that in many ways, and it also exposes that in many ways. And Drogo realizes that at the end of the line. I mean, he even goes back at one point to to his mother, who's kind of got over the fact that he was gone for so long, and she was almost dismissive of his existence. And he also met with a girl that he thought he had some kind of relationship with before, and that crumbled to pieces because, you know what? Because he was not really a man by that point. He was a shell of a man. He didn't relate to people or to things or to the world as it is, apart from the castle or the fort that he was at, sorry. He was so used to the psychological ecosystem of that fort that he had left everything else behind. It had molded it, as it had grown out of relevance in his mind, and he lost his humanity in some sense. So it is a very numbing read, but it is also a very interesting book because it does touch upon these themes. But as I said, I don't think that the writing style was anything to write home about, but I think for the ideas that it shares and that it discusses through the main character Drogo, I do think that it's a worthy piece to check out. But the writing did somewhat let it down for me, so I did rate it 4 stars on Goodreads. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, this sort of laid-back discussion, then please leave a like and comment what you thought of the book if you have checked it out yourself. It is a really good existential classic in its own right, of course, but not as good as, you know, Dostoevsky or Camus for me. But they are quite literally the giants of existential fiction. So I'll give Dino Buzzati a pass for that. Also consider signing up to my Patreon, where you can have early access to my videos and my my book reviews, my discussions, anything that I put out on YouTube, I put it on early there. And there are many different pieces of additional content on there, like, you know, more of my writing that I haven't published, personal updates, and some, of course, videos that aren't on YouTube as well. So if you want to support the channel and help me get better equipment, things like that, then yeah, consider doing that. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my review of the Tartar Steppe. Let me know what you thought of it, leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.